A 6-year-old girl was seen leaving flowers at the same grave every day. When they found out why, everyone cried. The sun was just rising over the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional chirp of birds and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Among the stillness, a small figure moved along the cobblestone path toward the town cemetery. Lily, just 6 years old, clutched a handful of wildflowers she had picked from the meadow behind her house. She wore a simple dress that swayed with her every step, and her curly brown hair bounced as she walked. Her wide, curious eyes scanned the road ahead, but she never hesitated on her path. It was a routine she had followed every morning for as long as anyone could remember. The cemetery gates creaked open as she pushed through, the sound echoing in the stillness. The place was quiet, almost solemn, with rows of weathered gravestones standing like silent sentinels. Lily made her way to a particular spot near the back, where a modest headstone stood under the shade of a large oak tree. The name carved into the stone read, Thomas Blake, beloved son, brave hero. Lily knelt in front of the grave, placing the fresh flowers gently at its base. She didn't speak, but her small fingers lingered on the stone, tracing the letters of his name as if in silent conversation. What struck anyone who saw her was the devotion in her actions. Every day, without fail, Lily repeated this ritual, despite her tender age. But when asked why she visited the grave, she would only smile softly and say, "Because I want to." Her quiet devotion had not gone unnoticed by the townsfolk. Speculation swirled among the curious residents. Who was Thomas Blake, and why was Lily so drawn to his grave? Most people in Willow Creek didn't recognize the name. For all intents and purposes, Thomas was a forgotten man. Yet, to Lily, he was everything. The mystery surrounding her visits began to spread, and whispers filled the town. Who was this man buried under the oak tree, and why did this little girl honor him so fervently? The questions hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, daring someone to uncover the truth. As the days turned into weeks, Lily's morning ritual became a topic of hushed conversations in Willow Creek. At the bakery, where the smell of fresh bread drew in early risers, and at the local diner, where steaming coffee cups clinked against saucers, the same question lingered. Who was Thomas Blake? Mrs. Carter, the elderly librarian, claimed to have combed through old town records but found no mention of him. Mr. Hargrove, the postman, insisted that the name sounded vaguely familiar, though he couldn't recall why. And young Clara, who worked at the flower shop, swore she had seen Lily picking flowers from the meadow more often than usual. "She's such a quiet little thing," Clara said one morning while tying a ribbon around a bouquet. I asked her who the flowers were for, and she just smiled and said, "A very brave man." The mystery deepened. One brisk autumn morning, as Lily made her usual trek to the cemetery, she noticed a man standing near the oak tree. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a stern expression softened only by the curiosity in his eyes. It was Sheriff Morgan, a man who had served the town for decades and had a reputation for solving the unsolvable. "Good morning, Lily," he said in a voice as steady as the earth beneath their feet. "Good morning, Sheriff," she replied softly, clutching her flowers a little tighter. Morgan studied her for a moment. "You visit this grave every day. That's a mighty kind thing to do. Do you know Thomas Blake?" Lily nodded. "I know about him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what do you know?" "He was a hero," Lily said simply, her eyes shimmering with an innocence that belied the depth of her words. "He saved my mommy's life." The sheriff's brow furrowed. He had lived in Willow Creek his entire life, and as far as he could recall, there hadn't been any mention of a Thomas Blake in the town's history, or of anyone performing a heroic act worth remembering. But Lily's conviction was undeniable. Intrigued, Sheriff Morgan decided to investigate further. That same afternoon, he stopped by Lily's home, a modest house with white shutters and a picket fence. Her mother, Anna, greeted him at the door with a warm smile. "What brings you here, Sheriff?" she asked, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "It's about your daughter," Morgan began. "She's been visiting a grave every morning. A Thomas Blake. She says he saved her life." Anna's smile faltered. Her face grew pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. "I didn't think she'd understand at her age," Anna said after a long pause. Her voice was thick with emotion. "But it seems she does." Before Morgan could press for details, Anna excused herself, retreating into the house with tears glistening in her eyes. Something about the name Thomas Blake had struck a deep, unhealed wound. The sheriff left that day with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. The story behind Lily's devotion was more than just a child's whim. It was rooted in something powerful, something profound. The next morning, Sheriff Morgan sat at his desk, flipping through old files and dusty records in the station's archives. The sound of rustling paper filled the air as he searched for anything that might shed light on Thomas Blake. Yet, no matter how far back he went, the name didn't appear in the town's official documents. Frustrated but not ready to give up, he decided to visit the local church. Father Matthew, the aging priest who had served Willow Creek for over 40 years, greeted him warmly. "Sheriff, to what do I owe this visit?" Father Matthew asked, offering him a seat. Morgan explained the mystery surrounding Thomas Blake and Lily's visits to the grave. The priest's face grew thoughtful as he stroked his beard, his eyes distant as though sifting through decades of memories. "Thomas Blake," Father Matthew murmured. "Yes, I remember now. He wasn't from Willow Creek, but he came here during the Great Flood. Oh, it must have been 6 or 7 years ago." "The Great Flood?" Morgan asked, leaning forward. Father Matthew nodded solemnly. A storm unlike any we'd seen before. The river overflowed, and much of the lower town was submerged. Families were stranded, homes destroyed. We didn't have enough emergency services to respond. Thomas Blake was one of the volunteers who came from a neighboring town to help. The priest paused, his voice heavy with emotion. He was a firefighter, brave to the core. During the worst of the storm, he rescued a young woman trapped in her car as the floodwaters rose. He pulled her to safety, but what? Morgan urged. Father Matthew's eyes clouded. He didn't make it. The current was too strong, and he was swept away. A chill ran down Morgan's spine. "Do you know who the woman was?" The priest nodded slowly. "It was Anna, Lily's mother." Morgan felt the weight of the revelation settle over him like a heavy fog. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Thomas Blake wasn't just a name on a gravestone. He was the man who had given his life so Anna, and by extension, Lily, could live. That evening, Morgan returned to Anna's house. This time, she invited him in. They sat in the small, cozy living room, where the faint smell of lavender lingered. Lily was upstairs, sound asleep, leaving them to speak freely. When the storm hit, Anna began, her voice trembling. "I was driving home from work. I didn't realize how bad the flooding had gotten until it was too late. My car was stuck, the water rising fast. I thought," she paused, swallowing hard, "I thought I was going to die." She looked down at her hands, tears pooling in her eyes. "And then he came. Thomas Blake. He pulled me out, carried me to safety. But when he tried to get back to his team, the water swept him away. I never even got to thank him." Morgan listened intently, his heart heavy. "Does Lily know all of this?" "She knows bits and pieces," Anna admitted. "I told her about him when she started asking about heroes. I never expected her to understand, but she does in her own way." Morgan left that night with a newfound respect for Lily. Her daily visits to Thomas Blake's grave weren't just a child's innocent act. They were a powerful testament to the gratitude that transcended generations. But the story was far from over. The townsfolk had forgotten Thomas Blake, and Lily's devotion had stirred something in them. What would they do with this knowledge? Word of Thomas Blake's sacrifice began to ripple through Willow Creek like a stone dropped into a still pond. Sheriff Morgan's visit to Father Matthew and Anna's heartbreaking confession spread quietly at first, shared in whispers between neighbors and during casual conversations in the marketplace. But soon, the story ignited a spark of guilt and awe in the hearts of the townspeople. How had they let such a sacrifice fade into obscurity? At the general store, Mr. Grady shook his head as he rang up a customer. "A man gives his life to save someone from our town, and we don't even remember his name? That's shameful." At the diner, Clara sat with her co-workers during a slow afternoon. "Lily goes there every single day," she said, her voice soft. "She's just a kid, but she honors him more than the rest of us ever did." The guilt was palpable. Slowly, a quiet resolve began to form among the townsfolk. They couldn't change the past, but they could do something now. It started with small acts. One morning, as Lily approached the grave with her usual bouquet of wildflowers, she noticed something unusual. A neatly arranged wreath of white roses sat beside the headstone. Her small hands froze mid-step, her wide eyes scanning the cemetery for who might have left it. No one was there. The next day, there was another offering, hand-carved wooden plaque that read, "To a hero who gave everything." As the days went by, the area around Thomas Blake's grave transformed. More flowers appeared, candles were placed in careful rows, and handwritten notes of gratitude leaned against the base of the headstone. Each gesture carried the weight of a town's remorse and gratitude, a collective effort to honor the man they had forgotten. Lily noticed the change but said nothing. She continued her routine, laying her wildflowers at the grave as she always did. But inside, she felt a flicker of happiness knowing she wasn't the only one who cared anymore. Meanwhile, Sheriff Morgan took it a step further. He organized a town meeting to propose something more permanent, a proper memorial to Thomas Blake. "This isn't just for him," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "It's for us too. To remember who we are and the sacrifices others have made for us." The idea was met with resounding agreement. But as plans for the memorial took shape, another piece of the story was about to surface, one that would deepen the town's connection to Thomas and Lily in ways they never expected. As the town rallied to create a memorial for Thomas Blake, Sheriff Morgan received an unexpected call from Father Matthew. The priest's voice carried an urgency that immediately caught Morgan's attention. "Sheriff," Father Matthew said, "I think you should come to the church. I found something that might interest you." Within minutes, Morgan arrived at the church, where Father Matthew stood waiting near the altar with an old, weathered box in his hands. "This was left behind years ago, just after the flood," the priest explained. "It belonged to Thomas Blake. His family sent it to the church in hopes it would keep his memory alive, but it's been gathering dust in the archives. I never had the heart to open it until now." With care, the priest placed the box on the table and opened it. Inside were a few personal items, a firefighter's badge, a photograph of Thomas in his uniform, and tucked neatly in an envelope, a handwritten letter. The letter was addressed simply, "To anyone who remembers." Morgan's brow furrowed as he unfolded the paper. The ink was slightly smudged, but the words were still legible. He began to read aloud. "To anyone who remembers. My name is Thomas Blake. If you're reading this, it means my time came while doing what I love, helping others. Being a firefighter isn't just a job. It's a promise. A promise to protect, to serve, and if necessary, to give everything for the safety of others. I don't know what circumstances led to my end, but I hope it was for a cause that mattered. I hope someone out there is safe today because of what I did. That's all I ever wanted, to make a difference. If you remember me, please don't remember my sacrifice with sorrow. Honor it with kindness. Help someone in need. Look out for each other. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. With gratitude for the life I lived. Thomas Blake." Morgan's voice faltered as he finished reading, the room heavy with emotion. Even Father Matthew, a man accustomed to comforting others, looked visibly moved. "This changes everything," Morgan murmured. The sheriff brought the letter to the town meeting that evening, reading it aloud to the gathered crowd. As the words echoed through the hall, people wiped tears from their eyes. Thomas's humility and sense of purpose resonated deeply, reminding them of the power of selflessness. The letter was placed on display at the planning site for the memorial, inspiring even more people to contribute. The townsfolk no longer saw Thomas Blake as just a name on a gravestone. He became a symbol of what they aspired to be as a community, united, courageous, and compassionate. But as the Memorial Day approached, an unexpected visitor arrived in Willow Creek, carrying a revelation that would make the town see Thomas Blake in an even brighter light. As Willow Creek buzzed with preparations for the memorial, a stranger arrived in town. He was an older man, his gray hair neatly combed, and his suit slightly wrinkled from travel. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the streets as though searching for something or someone. He found his way to the sheriff's office, where Morgan was reviewing the final plans for the unveiling ceremony. "Sheriff Morgan," the man asked, his voice polite but firm. Morgan looked up. "That's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Robert Blake," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Thomas Blake's brother." Morgan froze for a moment, then quickly shook his hand. "Robert, it's an honor to meet you. Your brother is, well, let's just say this town owes him more than we can ever repay." Robert nodded, his expression softening. I've heard. That's why I'm here. When word of the memorial reached me, I knew I had to come. But I also wanted to share something with you all, something that might add even more meaning to this event. Morgan's curiosity was piqued. What is it? Robert placed his briefcase on the desk and carefully opened it. Inside was a stack of letters and photographs. Thomas had a habit of writing letters to himself and to our family. It was his way of reflecting on the work he did and the risks he took. I found this one in his belongings after he passed. I think it was written not long before the flood. He handed Morgan an envelope marked simply, "In case of the worst." Morgan unfolded the paper carefully, his hand steady but his heart pounding. He began to read aloud. To whoever reads this, if this letter finds its way to you, it means I didn't make it. I hope that doesn't make you sad, because I've lived a good life, a life of purpose. I became a firefighter because I wanted to help people, to make the world just a little bit better than it was when I found it. I've always known the risks that come with this job. There's no guarantee we'll make it home at the end of the day, but that's the price we pay for the chance to save lives. And it's worth it. Every single time. If I'm gone, don't dwell on how it happened. Instead, remember why. Remember that helping others, even in the smallest ways, is the most important thing any of us can do. Look out for each other, take care of your community, and don't let fear stop you from doing what's right. Life is short, but it's also beautiful. And the beauty is in the connections we make, the lives we touch, and the love we leave behind. Thank you for letting me be part of this world, even if only for a little while. With love and gratitude, Thomas Blake. When Morgan finished reading, the room was silent. Robert sat quietly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. This letter, it's like he knew, Robert said softly. He didn't know when or how, but he accepted it. And he left this for all of us to remember what really matters. The letter was shared with the town at the next meeting, and it struck a powerful chord. Thomas's words became a rallying cry for the community, a reminder of the values they aspire to uphold: bravery, kindness, and unity. As the Memorial Day approached, the townsfolk poured their hearts into honoring Thomas Blake. The gravestone that had once been lonely was now surrounded by love and gratitude. But the ceremony itself would bring emotions to a peak, leaving a lasting impact on Willow Creek forever. The day of the memorial dawned with a somber yet hopeful air over Willow Creek. The sky was a brilliant blue, the kind of day that seemed made for remembrance. The townsfolk gathered at the cemetery, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces a mixture of quiet reflection and pride. Near the oak tree where Thomas Blake's grave lay, the community had transformed the area into a place of honor. A stone memorial had been erected, engraved with his name, his firefighter badge, and the words, "In honor of Thomas Blake, a life given, a town saved." Lily arrived with her mother Anna, holding a fresh bouquet of wildflowers. Anna had braided Lily's hair and dressed her in a pale blue dress, but Lily still looked like the same earnest little girl who had come every morning to place flowers at the grave. Sheriff Morgan opened the ceremony, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We're here today to honor a man who gave his life for our community. Thomas Blake may not have been born here, but his sacrifice has forever made him one of us." Morgan recounted Thomas's story, the flood, his heroic act, and the way he had touched the lives of everyone in Willow Creek, even as a stranger. He shared the contents of Thomas's letter, the words echoing in the hearts of those gathered. When it was Robert Blake's turn to speak, the crowd fell silent. He stood tall, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Thomas always said that being a firefighter wasn't just about saving lives. It was about inspiring others to do the same, to care for one another, to see each other as family, even if you've never met. As he spoke, Robert placed a framed photograph of Thomas at the base of the memorial, a young man in his firefighter uniform, smiling proudly. Then, unexpectedly, Anna stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held onto Lily's. "I owe my life to Thomas Blake," she said, her voice wavering. "Because of him, I'm here today. And because of him, Lily is here. We will never forget his courage, his sacrifice, or the kindness he showed, even to strangers." Lily stepped closer to the memorial and laid her bouquet of wildflowers on the ground. Her small voice broke the silence as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Blake." The crowd was moved to tears. Families embraced, neighbors held hands, and the air seemed to hum with a collective sense of gratitude and unity. As the ceremony concluded, the townsfolk stayed behind, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. The once forgotten grave was now a vibrant symbol of hope and community. People vowed to visit often to keep the memory alive, not just of Thomas Blake, but of the values he represented. But for Lily, the day wasn't just about closure. It was about carrying on Thomas's legacy in her own quiet way. And as she and her mother walked home, she looked back one last time at the memorial, a small smile on her lips. Weeks passed, but the impact of Thomas Blake's memorial lingered in Willow Creek. The cemetery, once a place of quiet solitude, became a gathering spot for reflection and community. People brought flowers, lit candles, and left notes of gratitude at the base of the new memorial. Lily continued her daily visits, though now she wasn't alone. Occasionally, townsfolk would join her, placing their own tokens of respect beside hers. Some even stopped to tell her stories about how Thomas's sacrifice had inspired them to reconnect with loved ones or lend a helping hand to a neighbor in need. One crisp autumn morning, Lily found Clara from the flower shop waiting by the memorial. She smiled warmly and handed Lily a small bouquet. "These are for him," Clara said, "but I wanted to give them to you to place, if that's okay." Lily nodded, her bright eyes reflecting a sense of responsibility beyond her years. She knelt by the grave, carefully arranging the flowers alongside her own wildflowers. Meanwhile, Anna found herself slowly becoming more active in the community. Inspired by Thomas's sacrifice and the town's newfound unity, she volunteered to organize a charity event to support the local fire department. "We can't bring him back," she told the organizers, "but we can honor him by supporting the people who carry on his work." The event was a success, raising funds for new equipment and safety training. At the end of the day, the fire chief stood before the crowd and unveiled a new tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of the flood, the town would hold a day of service in Thomas Blake's honor. For Lily, this tradition became a cornerstone of her life. As she grew older, she remained a symbol of gratitude and perseverance in the community. By the time she was a teenager, she had become an advocate for first responders, often speaking at events to share Thomas's story and the lessons he left behind. Years later, Lily returned to the memorial as a young woman. The oak tree still stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the wind. The memorial had weathered time, but its message remained clear. A life given, a town saved. As she laid another bouquet of wildflowers at the base, she reflected on how one man's selflessness had shaped her life and the lives of so many others. "Thank you, Mr. Blake," she whispered again, her voice steady but filled with emotion. And as the sun set over Willow Creek, the town stood as a testament to Thomas Blake's legacy, a community bound by kindness, courage, and the simple act of remembering. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness and sacrifice, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Here, we share incredible stories that inspire, move, and remind us of what truly matters. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Together, let's spread more stories of hope and courage.